just got fired. I was broke, couldn't afford rent in downtown Brooklyn. And I walked into a bodega, bacon, egg, and cheese, and a chocolate milk. Went to tap my Chase card, and I got declined. I didn't have enough money in my checking account to get a bacon, egg, and cheese, and a chocolate milk. I always remember what it's like to be broke, not have direction. You don't have options. You don't have choices. That gear that I get to, whether it was as an SDR manager, or as an AE now, President's Club 2 years in a row, I'm able to get into that gear because a lot of people either never went through that experience or they've been selling for so long they forget what that experience is like. And I don't let go of it.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this episode of 30 Minutes to President's Club. My name is Armand Farouk, and I'm here with my co-host, Nick Sigelski, and we are live in studio with the one and only Johnny Larson. If you did not hear his last episode, he is the #2 worldwide TalkDesk AE, and he did over 200% of quota, multiple quarters, multiple years, and holy smokes, is this one to watch. Nick, why should people listen?
When I was in new AE, I inadvertently threw so much of my commission check in the trash because I didn't know how to present pricing. I didn't know how to hold my ground in a tough negotiation. And Johnny is working the New York territory for TalkDesk, where he is working with some of the toughest buyers. And he takes us through how he presents price, when he presents price, how he holds firm, how he negotiates when folks are trying to wring him dry. This episode, Armand, I would be driving a nicer car if I had listened to this 5 or 6 years ago.
And folks, we are live in studio with Johnny, so if you want to catch this in Tacticolor or Technicolor, go check it out on YouTube. And a 3, 2, 1, let's roll.
All right, Johnny, welcome back to the show. You may recall that we start every single episode with your top 3 actionable takeaways, so let's get your 3.
Gentlemen, thanks for having me back. First actionable takeaway, pricing. When it comes to pricing, I always say to my buyers, my current customers, and I say this in jest, this is not Louie and Ernie's Pizzeria of the South Bronx. I cannot show you a menu with regular Sicilian and pepperoni. There's a lot of nuances and a lot of levers that need to be pulled when it comes to pricing. So what I explain to them is all the different ways that pricing can be impacted. It would be most appropriate if we can position some time next week and walk through these items with you and the core buying team, as opposed to me blindly sending you a PDF that's really arbitrary and doesn't mean much.
Very nice. What's number 2?
Number 2 is going to be expansion plays. And so a lot of organizations, to include my own, we have the ability to not only hunt new logos, we also have the ability to retire quota with expansion. What I firmly believe when it comes to expansion is once you get that DocuSign, you close it out in Salesforce and you celebrate the win with your team, stay close to the prospect, stay close to the buying team. Once they kick it off, once they go through discovery and qualification and everything else, the closer you stay to the product, the closer you stay to the prospect, the closer you stay to the buying team, the more likely that expansion is going to come in Q1 and Q2 of next year.
Yeah.
I make sure that when I communicate with professional services leadership, I want to be there to facilitate the intro kickoff call. I want to be on the kickoff call. I'll let them know that the project manager assigned is going to be your quarterback throughout the course of the process of deployment. However, I want to be on every single email thread. I want to be on every single calendar invite. And between, let's say, every 2 to 3 calls, I'm going to end that call and then text with the prospect to get their immediate feedback. The closer you are to staying true to that strategic partner that you position during the pre-sales motion, the more likely you are to have their buy-in and their trust to start expanding, upselling, and cross-selling into the account later when you most need it.
Killer. Johnny, round us out. What's number 3?
Number 3 is going to be 2 different ways that we leverage our customer success team and our value consulting team as ways to drive expansion and growth across the account. With the customer success manager, we want to identify what their active contract looks like as it pertains to recent product updates and recent product launches, and how do those products tie into their KPIs, their metrics, and what that said organization is trying to accomplish. The second piece is going to be value consulting. If we leverage and understand that the value consulting team is finding aggregate data that tells us that the customer is not leveraging the tools in the most optimal fashion, let's bring them onto the call and show them how they can reduce costs. Let's show them how they can reduce overhead. Let's show them how they don't need so many agent licenses. Maybe we can sprinkle in some AI instead. So leveraging the village post-sale the same way you would leverage the village pre-sale.
When would you ideally share price in your sales cycle?
So obviously there's a variety of different time periods, opportunities, and projects that come up that would dictate pricing. You could be talking about pricing of expanding a current customer. You could be talking about pricing of a blind RFP, a demo request, or somebody that your SDR booked outbound. We want to make sure that they're seeing the product, they're seeing a demonstration that resonates with them. And we want to make sure that we can show value prior to seeing that sticker shock. I typically like to show pricing once I understand that this is a real tangible opportunity and that we're at some sort of a short list. RFP, obviously, you have to understand who the buyer is. And based on the market, based on the size and the requirements of the RFP, you can kind of know from an industry knowledge perspective who else is going to be invited to this bid. If it's a smaller deal, 30, 40, 50 licenses, I know the big whales and the big dogs in my industry aren't going to be on this. So I can kind of tell where my immediate competitors are going to be from a pricing perspective. So that's where I'll position it. I also know that this particular industry does not like signing 4, 5, and 6 year agreements. They like the 12, 24, and 36. So I'm going to use that to my advantage. More often than not, it's going to be the inbound demo requests and the talk to sales leads that come in through the SDR and the marketing team that show up on a 10-minute call and they want to see pricing right away. And that's when I put my foot down. And I explain to them simply, there's a multitude of things that dictate price. License count, potential growth of your organization. This is going to be dictated on length of terms. What kind of integrations are we talking about? Are you using your current carrier? Or are you porting your numbers over to TalkDesk? There's a multitude of things that are going to dictate the numbers that you will see on that order form. So I don't think it's in our best interest, not just mine, to just blindly send you a PDF. I have a working spreadsheet that you and I can use together in real time on a call. Why don't we position 15 to 20 minutes next week? I'm going to show you exactly how that spreadsheet works. And that way, if you're taking this price to your CFO, if you're taking it to your senior level leadership, it's going to resonate a lot more than if I just send you a blind arbitrary PDF.
So I can already imagine a lot of junior sellers saying, okay, on the first call, they saw the product. I gave them a 5-minute demo. They said they were interested in my solution. So I've shown them value and I'll give them a quote at the end of the call. You mentioned those 3 criteria. I want to zoom in on the last one. What do you need to hear from the prospect to know that they actually understand the value of what you can bring to the table?
I need to hear somebody, at least that's an influencer to the buying team, that what TalkDesk has shown on said demonstration or said architecture deep dive or said scoping call is going to be something that is going to ameliorate a pain that they are experiencing today. So for example, if we're talking about an MSP, which is an IT consulting firm. A lot of MSPs use ConnectWise, and ConnectWise is their record of truth in their ticketing and support system. If they can't integrate their current contact center infrastructure with their ticketing system, their agents are working at a multitude of windows. And a lot of times, activities and tasks that are taken within the contact center are not being pushed and synced into their record of truth, which means not only do you not have visibility to support your customer, but then at the end of the transaction, all the necessary information is not being associated with the account record. So now, we show them the visibility of what it looks like when they end that interaction. The information gets pushed into ConnectWise, or we can even embed into ConnectWise. The fact that they can't do that today, the time, the money, the head count that they don't need to hire next quarter, usually you hear right away that this is a no-brainer. This is something we need to move forward with. Obviously, cost is going to come into play. We're firm believers in TalkDesk that until we get technical discovery and until we can identify 3, 4, 5 points that is going to resonate with them, we're not showing you a demo.
When you have a customer who's pushing for just like, no, I want to see this, I want to see this, I want to see this, and they want the generic tour, how do you like push them and be like, no, like I really need to understand your situation more?
I'm very, very polite and respectful, but I'm also very blunt with buyers as well. And I was having some conversations with some buddies that work at a competitor of ours. And they were saying that it does take a New York-like character to be able to support the New York territory. Right? You have to have thick skin. You have to know when to put your foot down. You can get pushed around managing this territory, depending on what you're selling, obviously.
Can you give me more examples of putting your foot down and what that looks like? I think that's one of the biggest areas sellers screw up.
There is a buyer, and he's a COO. And right now, he wants me to pull all the levers of a 5-6 year deal, but he only wants 24 months. And he's not caving on it. He wants 40 to 50% off of license count. He wants implementation waived. He wants 3 to 4 months up free because he knows that through deployment, he can't use the tool. So he doesn't want to pay for the tool until it's actually live. So he wants all of the nuance and all of the upside of signing a long-term lengthier agreement, but he wants it on his terms, which is 24 months. And so we're going back and forth. We're going back and forth. I essentially put my foot down and said, you need to identify what's most important here when you bring this to the CFO. Is it the length of term? Is it the runway from deployment and kickoff and not paying for that service? Is it the cost of the license? Is it cost of the ConnectWise integration? What is it? And once we can identify that, I'll drill down on that. I tell them, I said, I have a job to do.
Yeah.
and our company is looking to go IPO. It is not sustainable practice for us to
Mhm.
give away the kitchen sink and then some and get nothing in return.
Mhm.
Partnerships are give and get, right? There needs to be reciprocity here. I can meet you on bullet point 1, 2, and 3.
Mhm.
Number 4, I just can't do. It's
Mhm.
not in the best interest of the health of my company to give you number 4. 1, 2, and 3, let's do it. Let's do it. Let's make you whole. But you have to understand as a COO yourself who sits at the table, I can't give you number 4.
So earlier you talked about, okay, once you've shown value with someone who can at least influence a buying decision, you might be able to share price. But how do you deal with the situation where a champion wants a piece of the meat and then they're like, all right, now I'm going to introduce you to my CFO. And then the CFO wants another piece, or maybe the executive wants another piece. How do you make sure that you don't die by a million cuts in your negotiation?
When I go through negotiations and contracting and pricing reviews, I need to make sure that you're relevant on that call as it pertains to the person who's going to greenlight it and the person who's going to sign it.
Mhm.
And if you have nothing to do with either of those two functions, I don't want you on my pricing call. So all these different people might want a piece, but at the end of the day, when it comes to the pricing review and it comes to contract negotiations,
Yeah.
I only want to deal with the person who's going to greenlight it and the person who's going to sign it.
How do you reconcile that with oftentimes what will happen is a very junior person will be sent out as the scout to go click request a demo on 6 different companies' websites. And then you get on with a IT manager who's like, yeah, I was told to go look at some software. And they're your gate sometimes to getting to the executives who greenlight and sign this thing. And they're like, hey, I need to know all of this information. They've got their checklist. So how do you reconcile what you want with this scout that's getting put in front of you?
We always want to address the product,
Mhm.
right? We always want to address, what it is that they're looking for, something that our solution can ameliorate for.
Mhm.
Absolutely. But more important than that is, who are you as it pertains to the buying team?
Mhm.
Who are you as it pertains to the person who's going to greenlight this project? If it's somebody who's super junior and I know that they're not going to be the person to greenlight it or sign it, what I'll typically do is I'll say, we need an NDA executed before we can share a certain degree of information on our next step demonstration.
Yep.
Furthermore, with typical accounts that are in your industry, they might require a certain degree of vendor due diligence. So I need to know up the chain who's going to be involved in overseeing that due diligence information, who's going to be involved in this decision-making process,
Mhm.
because before we can transition to a demo or even review pricing, this is standard operating procedure for my team. We need to identify these items before we can proceed with next steps.
Yeah.
So how can you help me get that information so I can get you on the demo?
Let's say it's not a junior person, it's a champion, so a director level person, and then champion introduces you to power. You've won over the champion, you've won over power, now it's time to go through pricing. I've found that if I deliver pricing to both my champion and power at the same time, they will get tight-lipped because the champion doesn't want to peep early the wrong thing, and power is like, I'm not going to say the wrong thing in front of my champion as well or someone on my team, and so I don't get the real feedback that I need than if I was in a one-to-one meeting with just power. But at the same time, my champion feels like they've brought me this whole way, and I can't just be like, hey, you stay back here, I'm going to go meet with your boss to discuss pricing. So is your goal to discuss pricing with the champion plus power, just with power? And I'm curious, how do you manage that whole dynamic?
It's going to depend on the strategic nature of the opportunity, the size of the opportunity, the type of logo we're talking about.
Mhm.
If I'm talking about a large bank in the Northeast where
Mhm.
there's a lot at stake, not just for my own selfish earnings,
Mhm.
but it's a logo that my company wants. It's a deal that is going to help differentiate our financial services product at TalkDesk. I want everybody on that call. I need power there. When it comes to some of the smaller deals, I can certainly see that where you have a co-founder, and I've dealt with that before.
Mhm.
I closed super exciting to watch their growth on LinkedIn, by the way. They started with 5 seats last year, and it's a mental wellness application. So almost like telehealth through a mobile application.
Yeah.
And when we closed them, it was the founder and the head of operations and the head of IT and all the people that were just hired fresh out of college.
Yeah.
And so we're going through numbers. Everybody on that team that had a lot to say during the demos and a lot to say during the scoping call, they're quiet now.
Yeah.
Because they know that the founder is going to be the one to make the decision. They don't want to say anything. So to answer your question, typically for my industry and what I'm selling into, there's no point in reviewing pricing with anybody but power. I think it's helpful to have them all there because more often than not, power isn't a part of every single conversation. The champions are. So they see the value, they know the value. In my particular industry, the more the merrier,
Mhm.
but I'm not reviewing pricing if the power is not there.
So you've got a meeting with power. Maybe you have some of the other merrier there. How do you structure and run your pricing calls?
So what I'll typically do is walk through a variety of it's a deck really, but it's a multitude of slides. It's not an organized deck like a demo deck.
Yep.
But what we'll do is we'll get a pricing deck together, and the first couple of slides is just a reiteration of everything that's in scope up until this point, reminding them of what comes with this tiered package, reminding them of these potential add-ons and how they coincide to their desired state. Why did we review these products? Why did you think you needed these products? And we'll go through there just to give them a refresher of what value we're bringing.
How long does that take, that piece of the call?
It depends on the size and scope of the opportunity. It could be all of 5 to 7 minutes. If I have a 5-seat healthcare tech startup in Long Island City, that part could take 2 minutes.
Yeah.
You need voice, you need SMS and Salesforce connectors, we're done. Right? Here are the products. Here's what they do. Here's why they're in scope. Now let's flip over and look at the proposal options.
Yeah.
Obviously, with a bigger opportunity, it's going to be a little bit more nuanced than that. We're going to kind of dive deeper into some of the integrations and the phased approach of professional services, what kind of post-sale support come with this package and so forth. I really like to get super specific. The bigger the logo, the more strategic the logo, the more ACV, the more commission involved. There's going to be a greater degree of care and attention and detail to reminding them what products we reviewed, why we reviewed them, and how they tie into your future state and your desired state. What pains are they solving for? And then we'll transition over to the actual numbers. Yeah. And then once we get to the numbers, and I can't speak for other industries, but in our particular industry, you typically see 24, 36, 48, 60 month. We'll go through the length of terms. We'll go through the billing options. We'll go through the recurring services, the optional add-on services, the usage services, professional services. And then what I always like to show, and I'm somebody who never presents list price ever, I'll always show a box of cost avoidance. So if I know that this is going to be a big account, there's going to be a ton of expansion in Q1 and Q2 next year, I just want to land this thing now.
Yeah.
Right? I'm going to show them the discount and I'm going to show them the cost avoidance. So if I sold you this at list price, Mrs. Buyer, look at that MRR, look at that AR. This is what I'm doing for you so we can wrap this thing up before Christmas. So not only do I show the pricing options, I show them all the different levers that I've been able to pull based on the length of term, because we want long-term strategic partnerships and predictable revenue. It's healthier for the business, but I'll show them the longer we go, these are the more levers I can pull, but here's the cost avoidance. Here's list price. It's public on our website, but here's what I saved you. The only stipulation is we need that MSA done, and that DocuSign's got to come in before Christmas Eve.
How do you decide what the deadline should be? Because I imagine some customers have a 7-month legal security nonsense process, and other customers are like, boom, we could do the contract in 2 weeks.
So I think first and foremost, with our particular industry, you have to understand contact center is, in many cases, the lifeline and the blood of somebody's organization. They quite literally have to be able to speak to their customers and their end users. They have to. Whether that's through voice or digital channels, you have to be able to communicate with your end users. So first and foremost, when is that contract coming up? Or when is that outdated product going end of life? That's number one. Number two, the complexity of the integration. So if I'm selling software into a bank, I know that most regional banks, bigger credit unions, and the major players in financial services, they're probably using some sort of a Jack Henry, Fiserv, COCC type of banking core that we refer to. That's their secured record of truth, if you will, for banking members and clients and their personal banking information. Well, we know that that process, if that integration is required on day one, and I know that that deployment process takes at least 4.5 months, well, then I work backwards and I have a mutual success plan to say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Prospect, this is when your current provider dies. This is when it goes offline. This is when you say you want to be live. Now let's work backwards, right? We know that Jack Henry takes 4.5 months to integrate. We know that it takes this long to port your phone numbers over. We know that it's going to take this long to build out your conversational AI product. So if we want all of this live on day one by June 15th of 2025, that contract has to be signed no later than the 5th of January. So I'll always work backwards based on what I know is in scope. That's how I can help dictate the timeline when maybe there isn't.
This is why it's critical to discuss success plan or mutual action plan before the full proposal. And the reason for that is I had a client that was trying to close a massive public enterprise deal in 4 weeks. And the first time they wanted to put them on the 4-week timeline was when they gave them a proposal. And I was like, guys, do you know how long their legal process takes? Do you know when they want to go live? Do you know how long it's going to take them to implement? Do you know how long the security process is going to be? I guarantee if you knew what logo it was, you'd be like, that deal is not closing until Q2 next year. And so you need to get alignment on when they could close
Right.
before you hold their feet to the fire.
Yeah, you look like a used car salesperson. Like, you look like a jackass if you're like, hey, you get a discount if you close by Christmas Eve. And they're like, yeah, we were thinking of Christmas Eve of next year is when we were going to be able to sign based on our timeline.
Right. So what I was alluding to before was that's post-identifying
Right.
their legal process looks
Exactly.
like. Because I have some organizations, I have a late-stage opportunity right now where the buyer is also going to be the guy that reviews the MSA. And I said, Mr. Prospect, I sent you the MSA like 6 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Have you taken a look at it yet?
Mhm.
You know, the last thing I want to do is we get all hot and heavy and excited about signing the DocuSign.
Mhm.
You haven't had legal comb through. And he said, Johnny, I'm the person who comes through the MSA, and I guarantee it'll take me no more than 24 to 48 hours. So when I can identify that part of the buying process, then I feel comfortable with my pre-Christmas Eve move.
Yeah.
But if I don't understand how legal works, I've seen nightmare situations. I closed the deal in Q2. It was a logo down in South Florida through a reseller.
Yeah.
Their legal process took a month and a half.
Ugh.
A month and a half of combing through every single word and punctuation mark through the SOW, through the MSA, through the NDA, through the BAA, all of it. And it took a month and a half. I've had other buyers with the same contract value. They turned the MSA around in 3 days. So I think identifying what that legal process looks like prior to the pricing and prior to you asking for the sale is, like you had mentioned, it's imperative.
You're selling into the New York territory. And I know that when you present pricing, when you present those figures, even when you present the cost avoidance stuff, you're going to have people that try to rattle you and shake you and get you to discount again. How do you deal with a buyer that's trying to rattle you and might be playing hardball on a negotiation after you present price?
I think first and foremost, it's helpful if you can identify, if you're on a short list, who the competitor is, and then remind them of where they are in the market space and remind them of what they do from a pricing perspective. I think the second thing is reiterating value and making sure that the ROI that we presented to you based on the cost of doing nothing versus the cost of moving to TalkDesk.
Yeah.
And I think the third thing is reminding them of the change management process.
Yeah.
I typically don't get pushback on the cost of the licenses or the product. It's always professional services and employment.
Yeah.
Always. 7 times out of 10, it's pushback on professional services. And so when I get somebody rattling me and nickel and diamond trying to shake me to my core to get me to acquiesce to their demands, I think it's really going to depend on what's in it for TalkDesk. What's in it for the organization to acquiesce to what they're asking me? If the answer is nothing, I put my foot down and say, listen, we're obviously not being made whole here, either party. Why don't we either revisit this next Tuesday? My schedule's open. I'll send you an invite right now. Confirm that you got it.
Yeah.
Let's take the weekend to kind of take a deep breath. Let's revisit things next week. Or what I'll ask them, I'll blindly ask them, send me the other proposal you got.
Yeah.
If I know who the competitor is, I can tell them I have friends that work there.
Yeah.
I see their proposals almost weekly. I know what they can and cannot get away with from a pricing perspective. So I can either ask them for the pricing or I can ask you for the pricing. So which do you prefer? And so when I get that pricing and I can do apples to apples, maybe our contact center licenses are off slightly. Maybe their telco is very high and our professional services is very low. So you have to kind of see, where do they need to be made whole? Right?
So,
is it professional services need to come down? Is it length of terms that they're not comfortable with? What is it that we need to change? But if it's somebody who's rattling me and it's not in the best interests of TalkDesk's growth and logo acquisition, I'm blindly going to ask them, okay, send me the other pricing. Let's do an apples to apples comparison. I have 30 minutes next Tuesday at 2:00. Let's do it.
what would an average ACV or a TCV be on a deal for you?
I've closed deals with an annual contract value as little as $7,000 to $8,000 for a couple seats of a startup. And I've closed deals that are $3.5 to $4 million in total contract value for some of the larger credit unions across the state of New York and everything in between. The varying degree and size and scope of the opportunities that I've closed give me this different perspective on how to pull what levers and when to pull what triggers, what calls to play in certain deal cycles. Because I'm not only dealing with organizations that are under 200 employees across the board. I'm not only dealing with opportunities that are 20 seats and less, whereas other organizations, that's exactly how the sales organization is segmented.
Yeah.
It's based on seat count. It's based on annual revenue and things of that sort. I can work 5 seats. I can work 600 seats and everything in between.
Yeah.
So it gives me unique perspective.
Let's say that we're working with a $3 million deal and it's a 3-year deal. So $3 million TCV. And we'll call it $2 million in licenses, $1 million in professional services, for the sake of example. You present the $3 million deal to me. I go, Johnny, this is wild. I was expecting it to be 2. What is the first question you ask me in return?
the first thing that I would ask is, based on the numbers and based on what you're seeing here, obviously there's some initial sticker shock. Before we continue with anything else, what's on your mind? What are your thoughts? What about the difference between 3 and 2? Where's that coming from? How do you feel? What were your expectations coming into this call? Let them talk. Let them bring up why it's a concern. And then if that's our first go at pricing, then obviously I know I have some in the chamber, right, to bring to our deal desk and to bring to our finance team. I would allow them to kind of digest, sit back. We're not discussing anything else. We're not talking about length of terms. We're not talking about the renewal uplift is 12%. We're not talking about anything else. Because then that's a completely different conversation. Maybe we need to scale back on the $2 million worth of licenses. Maybe we need to remove some of the product add-ons. Maybe there's some integrations that we need to take a look at. Based on what you've explained to me up until this point, that is a requirement for day one. This is where we're at. If this isn't resonating with you, then let's talk. Let's have a conversation. But what led you to believe that this was going to come in at 2 versus 3?
Yeah.
And is it solely because that's what you're budgeted for? And if that's what you're budgeted for, and we're not going to get beyond that, then I know that we need to chop this thing up and redefine what's in scope for phase 1.
In my experience, there are 3 reasons a prospect will ask for a discount. Number 1, internal reasons. That's all we budgeted for. Number 2, external reasons. That's what your competitor charges. Or number 3, I just want a deal. And by asking that question of where were your expectations or how did you get to that $2 million number, you force them to come up with a real answer. And then you can fight the answer itself. But a lot of times sellers will just start freaking out when they're asked for $1 million discount, and they'll immediately jump to try to meet the buyer in the middle before actually pressure testing and seeing if there's a real reason for getting a discount at all.
Yeah, and I think, to your point, I've seen this so many times with some of the larger opportunities that I've worked with. A lot of times it's clout. It's, hey, look at that cost avoidance I just got us.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's a lot of it too, is political reasons internally. And the higher and higher you go into the enterprise and you're going through procurement, now you're talking about being financially incentivized to keep things in a certain ballpark when it comes to pricing and contracting and negotiations and so forth.
So how do you figure out where you're going to land between 2 and 3?
I think the biggest question that we would have to ask the buying team is, how important is the totality of the licenses and the products that accumulate to 2 million versus making sure that you're supported every step of the way? You get that white glove experience through professional services and the deployment is successful, knowing how much this product and this part of your business directly correlates to your organization's bottom line and your revenue and your customer support model. Is there an opportunity to scale back a little bit on the 2 million from the licenses and the products? Can we revisit this? Because the 1 million in professional services, everything you have in scope, this is what it's going to take to be successful. Bottom line, period, end of story. And if we try to reduce that and we provide you with half-assed support through deployment and post-deployment, you're not going to be set up for success. So we want to make sure we're putting you in a position to be successful with ProServe. The ProServe number can come down if we can revisit the 2 million. Is there anything about that 2 million that can technically be considered a nice to have and not a need to have on day one? If so, let's revisit that number, because that's directly going to impact that 1 million. And then we can work that back down, meet in the middle.
You're creating a cost to the negotiation where you're not just saying, okay, you want to be at 2, I'm at 3. We'll give you all the same stuff for 2.5.
Right.
You're saying, what products are you willing to part ways with to pay for that discount? Right. And what that does is it stops the bleeding. Because if you just give a $500K discount and you didn't make your prospect pay for it in product, they're just going to keep asking you for more and more and more until you just have to hope that they're not going to ask anymore.
The other thing that we would take into consideration is, where are we in Q3? Where are we in Q4? TalkDesk does very well. I'm very happy to be at TalkDesk, rep them well. But let's say I'm at a sales organization that's right on the cusp of hitting their yearly number or not. If we take this from 3 mil down to 2.2 or 2.3, if that brings us over the line or we lose this deal, get the thing done. Wrap it up. We called it 3. If it's 2.2 and we hit our yearly target, everybody gets paid, the customer's happy, send it out. Here's the pricing approved, send it out. So I think a lot of times the context of the situation, the scenario, the logo, the time of the year, how's your frontline leader doing? How's your RVP doing? Where's the organization to their yearly plan or their first half or second half plan? I think all those things tie into it. But that's where I would start to work it down in between 2 and 3. But then I also think the time of the year, the context, the scenario of where the sales team is according to plan is also going to dictate whether or not you can get that done or not too.
Johnny, this has been a phenomenal episode, but the clock is ticking and we are running out of time. So I got to move to the final question. So we've talked about a lot of great habits salespeople need to be exhibiting. Now I'm going to flip it on its head and ask you about a bad habit. So the last question is, what is one bad habit that you see a lot of salespeople exhibiting that you think they need to break because it hurts them more than it helps?
Particularly see this with younger junior reps. Every single opportunity, every demo request, every live chat, every single person that's willing to take a meeting, they gravitate towards. One thing that I've listened to on this show from previous guests is one of the skills to being a successful sales representative is being able to identify which opportunities to gravitate towards and which ones to let go of. Once these younger reps can start to pick through the opportunities that they should stick with and kind of discard the opportunities, they're not real, they're not tangible, they don't have budget, there's no real timeline, there's no compelling event, learn to let go of those because now you can reallocate your time towards the more tangible opportunities.
Johnny, thank you for joining us. Everybody stick around for a 60-second recap coming up soon.
Alrighty, Nick, it's time for a 2x2 recap from this first episode with Johnny Larson. What do you have for your 2?
So the first is if your prospect is trying to use competitors' pricing as a way to benchmark against you and get you to come down to match the competitor, directly ask them to share the competitor's proposal with you so that you can truly compare apples to apples. Number 2 is if you have a buyer who is trying to negotiate with you on multiple different planes, the term of the agreement, the different products, the professional services costs, etc., you have to ask them to rank those things in terms of what is most important to least important, and then say, we can't do everything. Let's figure out how we can work on the things that are most important to you.
Number 3, in order to show price in a sales call, your prospect needs to have 2 things. Number 1, they need to admit that your solution is going to remedy a pain that will impact the business. And then number 2, the prospect is actually relevant to the final signature or influencing the ultimate buying decision. And then lastly, number 4, if you're trying to sell a $3 million deal and you get asked for a discount down to $2 million, number 1, life isn't that bad. And then number 2, you need to isolate the ask and create a cost to the negotiation. In other words, don't just meet them in the middle at 2.5. Ask them, which of these products or licenses would you be okay parting ways with, or which of these things might be a little bit more nice to have, because I don't want to compromise on your customer experience. Alrighty, Nick, how can people help us out here?
So we put together a step-by-step guide for how you should structure your responses in a negotiation. We talk about things like isolating where their asks for a discount come from, how you can create a cost to any sort of discount or move that you have on the proposal. There's a link in the show notes. Go check that out. That guide has helped me have a structure to how I navigate tough negotiations. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week on the show.